All right, there we go. I was having some technical difficulties. Um, I'm not exactly sure why, but I don't want to. Sometimes technical difficulties happen. So today is Wednesday ramblings. I initially thought to title this something else, and initially that title was thoughts need to have action, because I'm not being very active, and I think this is a direct connection to post traumatic stress syndrome. Yesterday, I went out twice. I went out early in the morning to go get food because, one has to eat. There's been times where I really just haven't had any food, and I go to the local corner store, which is super expensive and has rarely anything. And I, prior to this, would eat pretty healthy. I mean, I never really ate junk food until recently because that's what I have access to. Still try not to. I try to eat food that is the best you can think you can get at the deli or at the corner store. And just, yeah, it's just a little bit um, sad how far I've fallen, much to inaction, if we want to stay on theme here. And that's one of the things that targeting does to you. And I know as soon as I said that, I started thinking about my audience of all my thousands, hundreds of thousands of listeners. And I thought they were thinking, well, why don't you do something? Get up and do something about it. Stop whining, you know. And it's easy for people who are not targeted to say that. And I know, it's so weird because when you talk to people who are not targeted, they get frustrated with you because they think that you're just making bad decisions, which in fact part of your targeting is getting you to make bad decisions, but and that you're not taking accountability, which is the catchphrase of the 2020s. um and not to say that people shouldn't take accountability, but after you take accountability, that doesn't mean that magically your life will change. It just doesn't, because then there's still people, if you're targeted, that are actively trying to destroy your life. And regardless to whether you take accountability or not, that won't change their actions. I mean, we've seen in society, right, what systemic oppression of any people does to those people that are being oppressed. And in this case, it happens to be me as a targeted individual. It's interesting because when I moved from San Francisco to Oakland, and I lived right next to Alameda. And I remember my ex-husband telling me, yeah, Alameda is racist and it's this or that. And, I was like, we'll see. And I remember thinking years in, like maybe 3 or 4 years in, I don't really feel like I've experienced any racism in Alameda. Not really. Maybe my opinion is a little bit different because sometimes you are experiencing racism and you don't know that you're experiencing racism. Do you know what I mean? There's things that go on behind closed doors that you aren't aware of. But at the time, I didn't feel any overt racism when I was in Alameda. I felt just fine. I felt comfortable going there, eating. shopping. There was a beach there that we would take our kids to. Um, so parks in Alameda. It just, we lived a lot of our free time and activities in Alameda. So I didn't feel that I was being oppressed in any way. So it's interesting. I don't know where I was going with that exactly. If anyone's listening, they're probably like, "What is this?" I don't want to waste my time listening to this person who has no direction. Um, but maybe it'll wherever I was going with that particular train of thought. Maybe it'll come back to me shortly. Um, so I was talking about inaction, and that part of being targeted is wanting you to be inactive. Then I was talking about the 2020s being all using certain catchphrases, and one of them is taking accountability. And then my argument was that you can take accountability as a target, and it doesn't matter because those that are oppressing you will continue to oppress you. Um, So I don't know where I was going exactly. So maybe I was going with I never felt oppressed. So it was easy for me to get up and do what I had to do when I was in my younger years in Oakland and I was pregnant, and I would do shopping and I would look for deals, and I just had this really um ingenious way of finding ways to serve to get what I needed um, for my kids. So they had all kinds of lessons, and they went to camp every year. And, I don't like saying we were poor, but we were poor people. I mean, we weren't like going to the food bank poor, but we certainly didn't have a lot of disposable income. We're a young couple starting out with 2 children. But I was able to think of ways to make sure that my kids had access to a lot of things that at least middle to upper class children were able to get, because I knew how to do that. And so again, I didn't really feel oppressed, and there was no one sabotaging us that I was aware of. And I say that because sometimes people say that you've been targeted since birth, and then at some point, I guess they make their targeting overt and you just don't know it. And that could be a thing, but I have no evidence really to support that. But the only thing I can say is that I've always felt different than other people. I've never been one of those people that wanted to join in large groups. I always wanted to kind of stand out from other people a little bit. I always thought that groupthink was ridiculous. Um, just to go along with people. It's funny because as a child, as an adolescent, of course you want to fit in to some degree. But I liked my kind of one foot in, 1 foot out, because it allowed me, for one, not to be caught up in one group of people. I had a lot of different friends across different areas. Like I had rocker friends, stoner friends, I had jock friends, I had friends that were in advanced placement classes because I was in those, a couple of them. And so I had different types of friends. So, but anyway, I'm just saying this, that in terms of targeting my whole life, I never felt I was targeted in my younger years. I just thought that life was probably difficult for everyone, and I think it is. So I never felt anything like that. But when, and I guess I'm saying all this to say that when you're targeted, that's one of the things that they take away from you, is that feeling of I can get up and I can go and I can figure it out and I can do this, because you feel like as soon as I walk out of the door, oh my God, you should just, and I know the people who aren't targeted don't get it, but there's just this flurry of intense activity, of, for one, of my tormentors that live in this building. As soon as I decide I'm going to go anywhere, everybody has to decide that they're going to go somewhere, and that's called coordinated entry and exit. So that means as soon as I open my door, I'm getting ready to leave, and I'm, at some point along that, someone down the hallway is ready to also leave, and they're leaving at the exact same time. And then once I get outside, then there's someone at the store that I'm going to before I get there. And again, I know that people are like, of course there is, because people go to the store all the time. That makes no sense. Why would you think that? But as a targeted individual, there's not, I didn't used to think this. I mean, that's one of the things that I believe that makes it different. There is no time in my past where I ever thought anybody at any point was following me or interested in following me. And also, I don't think it's everyone. I do think it's select people, and then you can often tell. So, but anyway, I think that's just one of the major things that they take away from me, that drive that I had. And I have it, I had it when I first came here. I had it when I was in Oakland and I was raising my kids. I had it when I went back to school. But being targeted there's something very specific about how they structure it, because you will be tortured when you are active. When there were times that I would go to yoga or do things, and you could just feel like, these direct energy weapons or whatever it is, just putting this like really heavy force on your body, kind of making it very uncomfortable for you to go places and do things. And then once you would go places, whatever the citizens on patrol or neighborhood watch or the smear campaigns that are being run, people would be following you. Of course, there's also always the following, but talking to you in negative ways, again, trying to hem you up in some kind of issue. So I also wanted to have this Wednesday rambling, not just be about targeting, because I feel like it's a broken record with that, because there's nothing really else to tell about it. Because almost every interaction is similar to what I've already explained, so there's no need to keep explaining it. But I think what I really wanted to talk about was just about how some of the ways that I think and my opinions about certain things. So today I was looking on Twitter, and I came across this photo, and the photo was of Kerry Washington when she was playing Olivia Pope on Scandal. And for a long, she was the mistress. She's a fixer in Washington, D.C., and she was the mistress of the president. And the president was white. He was also married. So then there was this post. There's this guy I follow and follows me on Twitter, and he is someone who is vehemently against interracial couplings. And I don't know if he knows or not, but I am in an interracial. I was in an interracial couple twice. My son's father's family is originally from Nicaragua, and my daughter's father is white. And I often think, oh my God, I wonder if he's going to find out about that. I have pictures of my kids, but I don't know. My son pretty much just looks like a lighter skinned black person, but not even that light. He's around my skin tone, maybe a shade lighter. And so he doesn't necessarily, when you see him, you don't think mixed necessarily. My daughter, to me, looks mixed, but I think obviously she looks like a black girl. She could just look like a light skinned black girl. I mean, I think now, especially because she lives out of the country and where she lives, I think it's not overly sunny. And I also, anyway, so she's a little paler than she once was. So I mean, I don't worry about the guy not liking me or anything because I was in interracial couples. But I would say that I definitely, though I am not 100% against them, I think that they're with the right person, it can actually be a good fit. But I think it's tremendously hard, and that's just from my own experience because culturally. So in the first relationship with the person whose family is from Nicaragua, and so they basically were Nicaraguan Americans, but they have a very strong culture. At least they did. I don't know about other people because it depends on how many generations away. Um, my ex, my father's son. I mean, my father's son. Obviously, I'm like I'm tired. I guess I don't know why I would be so tired, but not my son's father. My son's father. His mother was born in Nicaragua, so that's he's first generation American, Nicaraguan, and they're very. I was also looking at something else on Twitter. That's how I spend my days now, just on social media, which is another whole uh, conversation I want to have with my hundreds of thousands of listeners at some point, because I'm sure they're like, couldn't you be looking for a job or couldn't you be doing things? And yes, I probably could, but if you're targeted and harassed every time you leave your building, like when I went out yesterday, those 2 times, which I'm actually proud of myself for going out, I was shaking. And I'm not naturally a fearful person. But after over a year of being afraid to go outside because I'm followed and harassed when I go outside, it's hard for me to do so. So it's called post traumatic stress. But anyway, um, but culturally, they were very specific about some of the things that they wanted. I wouldn't say they were they racist? Yeah, to some degree, but not. They weren't mean to me. They weren't like, "Get out of here, you N word," or "Why are you?" They never said anything to me about, you know. They never called me out my name or anything. And by and large, I think his parents really just thought, for one, we were too young to get wrapped up in this relationship because I was 15, I think, or something, and it was too much. The intensity of our relationship was a little bit much, and but they had different expectation for women in the culture. They definitely had their own food. They were very family oriented, so there was always family everywhere, which was something different for me because at that time when I met him, I was in a foster home, and my foster home was great, by the way. It was I mean, as foster homes go, it was a good one. I lived a strong middle class lifestyle with people that were good people, you know, not perfect, but good people. But that's a whole nother conversation to have about being raised in the foster system from the time I was 9 years old. But they were decent people. But it was different than my son's father's family. And so once I had my son, let's just say, like, I remember the aunt saying, "Oh, you look like the babysitter because he's so light. He doesn't really look like you." So, of course, when my son was younger, when he was a baby, he was lighter than me, and he kind of, I mean, he didn't look a lot like me, I don't think. But as time went on, if you look at my pictures on my Twitter page, he actually looks a lot like me now. I mean, babies kind of don't look like anyone for a while, until their features start to develop. And so they would say things like that to me, or they would say things like, "Oh, she's not a good woman. She doesn't do this because she needs to know how to serve your food first," or, you know, I remember my son's great grandmother, who was darker. So I'm sure there was some African in her blood because she's dark. A darker Nicaraguan woman was like, "Yeah, I had to marry her ex-husband that she had all of her kids, most of her kids with. One of her kids she didn't have with him. He was Nicaraguan, but he's very fair skinned. So they would talk a lot about, you know, Blanco Wapo or whatever. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Please don't take offense. But basically, that, if you're white, you're beautiful. If you're dark, not so much." And so they had that colorism streak in their particular family. And I think this is a streak that runs through many Latino, not just Nicaraguans, but almost all Latin America. And I'm not saying every family, but colorism is deep across the world. So there was that. But actually, in that particular situation, I think I felt less uncomfortable with them. Like, it wasn't perfect, and I know that they probably didn't see me. I think they thought I was a decent person, most of them. I mean, there were some things that happened, and as a young woman, I'd made some decisions that were not good, and I take accountability for those. But they, I think, generally liked me. I mean, we were just young children that shouldn't have had a child at that age ripping and running the streets in the 90s. So I'll just leave it at that. But um okay, so that was that. Around 93ish or so, the relationship was pretty much dead in the water. I mean, we were not doing well as a couple, and by 94 we broke up completely. 93 we were in and out, breaking up, getting back together, that kind of thing. And then infidelity, there was a lot of infidelity in that relationship. um, but we were got together when we were 15 and stayed together until we were like 23. It just was silly. I mean, if I had one piece of advice I could give to anyone, it's like, I mean, I don't know. Everyone's different though, because you know that many boomers and some Generation Xers are married to their high school sweetheart, and it's all good. Like, they have a happy life. It's no marriage is perfect, and that's one thing that I think is different now, that people just break up their families and their marriages and things because they like, I got to do me and I need to be happy. And it's a lot more self-centered and selfish kind of situations, because it's easy to find someone else and just don't want to work on anything. And then it's interesting because then you go and you find someone else, and then you break up with them 5 years later or whatever it is, just because it's like people are more disposable. So then I got into this relationship with this white person. And I think when I first met this person, I thought that he was different than he was, because he was one of those white people that had not a black scent, but black characteristics because he was raised in Oakland and many of his friends were black or non-white. He had some white friends, but he wasn't, I wouldn't say he was like a wigger exactly, but I wouldn't say that. But I would say that he had a fetish for women of color, all types. I don't think he dated white women at all. And he was, when I met him, he had a year or two before, he had been engaged to a black woman or a biracial black woman. And at the time, I didn't realize that I was a fetish because I think that we both thought, and maybe he was my fetish. I don't know exactly. I didn't feel that at the time, and I had dated black men previously, not a lot, but I had at least two other relationships. I'm up until my targeting, or at least I noticed my targeting, I had been a serial monogamous, sort of. So from the time I was 16ish or whatever, 15ish to 23, I was in that other relationship with my son's father. And then after that, I was in this other, during that relationship, okay, so I said, remember in 2023, we were together and not together. And during that, 1993, sorry, as we were together and not together. So I had a boyfriend, and from the neighborhood I was living in at the time, and he was black. And then sometime earlier in my relationship with my son's father, I had in the very early stages. So I said there was a lot of infidelity. Well, he was cheating on, and this is when we were like in high school, or I had dropped out of high school in my junior year. So from my junior to senior year, there was other guys that I was seeing, and one of them, well, yeah, it was African American. So it wasn't like I was like, no, I only date these kind of people or whatever. I wasn't ever really like that. But I think I know that subconsciously that I did think that I might be better off if I didn't date an African American man, because I remember when I was young, right before I went to my foster home, like not that same day or anything, but like the year before, my mother and my father had gotten into an argument, and my mother said, "You know what? If you get married, you better marry a white man because niggas ain't shit." And I was like, okay, and which I really didn't like my mother very much. I'm sorry. God rest her soul, and I have a lot more grace for her now because I know life was hard for people. My father was born in 1924 or 25, and I don't know when my mother's born, but she was younger than him by about 10, 15 years. But I, when I was younger, I couldn't stand her because she wasn't very pleasant. Those boomer, everybody's experience is different, but those boomer parents, a lot of times, and my father, I don't know if he was even considered really a boomer, but they went through a lot, and especially being African American, my parents grew up in Jim Crow. So it wasn't, I don't know. My father was nice though, so you can't really blame it on just being in Jim Crow because he was a nice person. He was a loving father. He wasn't the best in terms of financial stability, but he and being there and all of that, but he was loving. But my mother isn't very a nice person. But anyway, so she said that to me, and I was like, whatever. But I remember that, and I remember when I met my daughter's father, and I didn't think this initially, but later on in the relationship, when you start thinking more in depthly, after the romantic haze, the honeymoon period kind of wears off. It wasn't like I didn't like him, but you just started thinking about, well, why am I really with this person? And I remember remembering her say that, and I was like, oh my God, is that why I'm with this person? That's not the right thing to. I shouldn't be with this person because someone told me, someone who I didn't. I mean, quite honestly, didn't respect my mother's opinion about anything really. I didn't. I didn't think that she was. I don't know what I thought about her. My mother was an intelligent woman, so I wouldn't say she she just was emotionally disconnected, and she's emotionally disconnected, and I'm not exactly sure what that was about, and incredibly selfish. I know I have some of those traits. I'm not emotionally disconnected though, because I was loving with my kids. My daughter more so than my son, and it's not like I didn't love him as much. I had them at two different periods in my life, so they are 7 years apart. So I don't know. What I'm just saying is I just didn't respect her opinion about that. I just didn't. And I knew that she said it out of anger because she was mad at my father at the time for whatever he was doing. So, but it did make me question, why would I choose this person? And I think honestly at the time I chose him because he loved me or showed me love. I mean, we are really on the outs now, so he might say I hated her and I didn't really like her and I don't know what I was thinking or whatever. I don't know. But at the time, I felt that he actually loved me and we had a loving relationship, and he provided stability. So I'm saying all of this because I started this with talking about the whole Olivia Pope thing. And in this post of this Olivia Pope and the president, they said that if young black men are hypnotized or it wasn't mind controlled, but there was another phrasing that they used, but let's just say hypnotized by rap music, brainwashed by rap music, then young black girls are brainwashed by TV. And I think there's something to be said about that. Because you do think, I mean, me growing up in the 70s and the 80s, that what you saw on TV, especially when you were not, you didn't have exposure to other people. So when I was growing up in the 70s until 80, so 80, I was 10, I I didn't know any white people. I think I had one white classmate growing up in my school. So, I mean, that's not exactly true. But there were a few others. I mean, there were some mixtures, but overwhelmingly it was I didn't go to their houses. I didn't hang out with them. My parents didn't have white friends or Latino friends or anything like that. I was around black people 24/7. So it wasn't even I mean, except for at school because their teachers were white, and I mean some of them were black too, which is also nice, in the 70s. But by and large, my life was just a black cultural life. And so the only white people I really saw were on television. And then you would see television shows like Different Strokes or, Good Times, obviously, The Jeffersons. But Different Strokes for a young black girl, that was crazy. Like, if you really think of the premise of that show, that these white, I remember wanting to be adopted by some rich white people so that I wouldn't have to be in this particular situation that I was in with my parents. I mean, my biological parents. I mean, again, we were poor. Excuse me. Too, but it wasn't like Good Times poor. We always lived in the house, and we didn't. and we always had food, and my mother had a car, and it wasn't like, oh, we were on the panhandle, like, please, sir, give me $1 kind of thing. But there were periods where there was probably no money or whatever. But there was always food to eat and stuff. There were other things going on in my household, and it wasn't drugs. My parents didn't do drugs. I'll just say that, since I don't want people like, yeah, they were on drugs. Like, no, they weren't. But there were other things going on, domestic kind of things. And my father was not abusive, so I'll also say that. We'll leave it at that. Um, but still, I mean, who wouldn't want to go live in some mansion with some rich white people that are going to send you to a good school, and you always have new clothes, and all the food you wanted to eat, and your parents were even keel and loving all the time and available, and who wouldn't want that? So you would start to think things such as, well, white people have a better life than black people. I mean, that was pretty much what you got from television. And because there were no real, this is just way before the Cosby Show. And I don't care what anybody says about Bill Cosby. I also think they need to start letting that air again. And everybody needs to compartmentalize that man in his private life was atrocious and did drugging women, and our wording them is fucked up. I mean, it's not, obviously that's fucked up. But there were other people in that show, and I feel like it's messed up that, for one, they don't get residuals from it airing. And the show itself was a good show. Do you know what I mean? People love Elvis, and we all know that he married Priscilla when she was underage, and also was with her. So let's stop playing games about that. And I was just looking at something about, what's that guy, Seinfeld, and then he was with that girl when she was like 16 and 17, and married her, I think, when she was 19 or 20, and her parents were okay with it, whatever. I mean, I am not one to judge all of that, but what I'm saying is, like, let's, you know people boycotting Seinfeld. They talk about it all the time, about how great it was, and I am not judging the man necessarily, but I'm just saying that let's separate the person from the art. But anyway, I don't want to. But the point is that was pre Cosby Show. That was pre Dr. Huxtable and Mrs. Huxtable Esquire, and growing up in a middle upper class educated family. We didn't see any of that. It was poverty and struggle for Black people on television, even in Different Strokes. The two characters, two Black characters, they came from, I believe the mother was the maid of Mr. Willis, who was their white savior who took them in after the mother died of something. So, of course, it was instilling in us that white people had it better and they were superior. Okay, I'm not going to mince my words here. So, of course, subconsciously, that was implanted in our psyches. And if you didn't have a strong family as a Black person growing up, because I don't think it affected every person, because a lot of people, I remember once when I was younger, Elvis was still popular, and I remember looking at singing Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog, and I was singing that, and one of my neighbors said, "Why are you singing that?" And I said, "I don't know, it's a good song or whatever." And he was like, "No, Elvis was a racist, and he said that Black people couldn't do anything for him but shine his shoes." And I always remembered that. And that just makes me think, I know, like, there were parents that were telling young Black kids about these things. That, yeah, that dude was racist and he stole Black music and then made it popular, and then everybody thinks that he's the king of rock and roll when he stole it from Black people. But of course, as a child, I didn't know that, and I'm thinking "Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog" is such a cool song, and I'm going on and singing it and thinking that Elvis is cute and so on and so forth. Now, I remember my brother, who's 13 years older than me, telling me that he, when he was younger, wanted to wished that he was white and had blonde hair and he was Dune Buggy, or I don't know who the person is, but some surfer guy that they had parading around on television. And my brother is very dark. He's beautiful. He's a very handsome man, but he's dark and looks nothing at all like whatever he was trying to wished he looked like. So you can see in our family, we just didn't have that. Obviously, my mother had some kind of issues, deep seated issues with being black, and passed that on to us. And my brother, who actually married a white woman twice, and never had any kids or anything. I mean, he's dated black women, and I think his girlfriend now is black. I don't know. I haven't talked to him. When you're targeted, all family ties at some point. Not always, because I know some targeted people who have good relationships. Like I know one, at, at least, and seems to have a really good relationship with his family. But I've severed all ties, unfortunately, except for my kids. But it was my relationship with my family was tenuous already. So back to this whole idea of the whole interracial. So when I got into this relationship with the white person, he was not like I thought. So his family actually was extremely well educated. They were a strong middle class family, but came from upper middle class family. So his mother, my daughter's grandmother, went to Tufts University, which is a baby kind of Ivy League. His father, my daughter's grandfather, went to MIT and was an astrophysicist. His I don't know what his mother did exactly. She worked with a lot of organizations, nonprofits, doing, I don't know, promotions. Maybe she was, I have no real idea what she did exactly. I think she did kind of marketing type things in her companies. And then the stepfather was an engineer. I don't know what college he went to, but they were all well educated and very. I wouldn't. It's not elitist. They weren't really elitist. That's a different connotation. But they were intellectually superior people in their minds. I'm not saying that, yeah, because I don't want it to come off like I thought they were superior to other people, but I think that they thought so. Not overtly, because then that would come off. I think many of them were liberal, like the mom was liberal, I'm pretty sure, and the stepdad. So they were nice, like white people get this label as they were so nice. They were nice, but they were condescending. So that's what I mean, and often patronizing. And as the only black person in that family, I remember once I was talking to his sister who was like a year. They were like Irish twins, so they were like 11 months apart or something like that, and she that was really into ballet as a child and as an adult too. But I mean, she didn't go professional, but she had trained at the Oakland Ballet, which is pretty well known. I don't know if it was the Oakland Ballet. I think it is, but anyway. So she heard and a lot of classical music and whatever. As I said, her parents were very educated, and I remember I had said, "Yeah, something about Mozart because the spelling of it looks like Mozart." And she laughed and she said, "You mean Mozart?" And I'll never forget that because I think I don't, and I'm not going to lie, I think I had a really hard time in my younger years being corrected because I think when I lived where I used to live, I was seen as proper and I read a lot. Um, but I was a small fish in a small, I was a big fish in a small pond. And once I got out into the world of people, I realized that no. And it all started in high school too, but maybe it's a story for a different time because it's not on the same subject. So I had a hard time with that because I could have just taken it in stride and said, "Oh, well, at least now I know it's Mozart and not Mozart." Um, and there were a lot of circumstances kind of like that. And one of the things that stood out to me, so there were situations like that where they were never overtly racist. They would never say anything like the N word or anything like that. They never overtly tried to make me feel bad about myself, but they just came off like they were superior. And and maybe some of that was with, at least with his parents, or because they were parents, right? And parents, especially boomer parents, I think tended to think that, ha ha ha, we know, and you just are silly in your thoughts because you're young and naive or whatever. But clearly, a lot of it wasn't just that. I mean, I was a girl that had been raised in the ghettos of San Francisco for a good portion of my life. And then I went to middle class situation for like 3 years. No, no, no. About 6 years of my life or so. And I learned a lot in that time, but I didn't make up for a lot of the time that I had been in. And there's a natural intelligence, and then there's also kind of academic and book learning. And although I read a lot, I hadn't had a lot of experiences outside of my neighborhood. And even when I was in the middle class situation, still that was just there. But anyway, so I think I was always running around feeling not as good and not as intelligent as the astrophysicist who went to MIT and who worked on the Star Wars project under Reagan. And I think that they made a point to kind of make me feel that way. My ex, when we got to the point where we were not doing very well in our relationship, would start to be very condescending and patronizing. And one of the things I'll say is that I think probably about 2 years before we broke up, we went to one of his aunt's house in Oregon, who owned a beach house and had Thanksgiving dinner there. And then they had invited some of their friends, and one of them was a younger, like a college student guy, and then my son who was in high school. And then they got into this debate about whatever. And my son is very well read, and as I mentioned, my kids were had access to many things. So my son thought a lot. He's very very erudite and thoughtful. And so he got into this debate with this other young man who's a couple of years older than him. And then the kid, the guy, the college age person said, "Yeah, this debate turned into an argument and it got heated." And then he said something about, "Yeah, I understand your boy, this or that." And you don't call a black young man, a boy. White men don't do it. It's not a thing. And so then I got involved at that point. And I said, "Look, don't call my son a boy." And then when they got into this argument, my ex grabbed my son kind of violently and pushed him outside of the house and told him to stop talking and stop being loud. And it's so crazy because after that situation, I think that my ex felt so embarrassed by us. Like we had done something. We had done something and we actually hadn't. It was actually the other person who had started it. And then my son just was countering his points. And then when the guy called him a boy, that's when I got involved. And then the thing that made it even worse was my ex grabbing my son and pushing him out, like violently out of the house, and telling him to shut up, which was way overreaction. Like, he was the one that actually made it into something. What it should have been was, hey, you guys, it's not that serious. Let's just calm down. Let's change the subject, before it got to the boy comment. And maybe the guy needed to apologize for calling him a boy. And then when we came back in, then the aunt was like, well, I can understand it. You kind of coming off like a mama bear and you want to protect your cub. But, that pretty much framing it as if my son and I were in the wrong, which to this day, we were not. I think it got heated, and the boy comment, which I don't think they really fully understood, and they never listened to me and never took any of my points as valid. So anyway, but even leading up to that, I remember, I had conversations with him. And I was telling him, yeah, my foster mother had said something about, because I said when I was pregnant with my son, I wanted a black doctor. And she said, no, don't get a black doctor. This is my foster mother, who's a black woman. So don't get a black doctor. And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, they haven't been practicing long enough. They're not as good as the white doctors. So you could see where my upbringing and my exposure was just like really a mind F, you know what I mean? Like, and I knew at the time, like, that's not right. And I was telling him, I was just saying, like, like, that's crazy the way that people used to think, as I'm having this conversation. And he said, yeah, but at least it's based on something that makes sense. And I was like, based on something that makes sense. So basically he was saying that he agreed with her, or that made sense for her to think that black doctors weren't as educated. But that to me makes no sense. What do you mean they're not as educated? They went to medical school, didn't they? I mean, come on. That to me didn't make any sense. And I didn't believe her. And I wish I had gone to a black doctor, because the way that man cut up my stomach, I had a cesarean with my son, cut up my stomach. It's always been so terribly deformed. And I remember asking the doctor before I said, could I please have a bikini cut, because I don't want a big scar. And then he said, no, you have to have it this other way because your son is so big, because he was 10 pounds, 5 ounces. And then come to find out years later, I was talking to another doctor. He said, no, you could have had a bikini cut. And most likely it's just easier to do it the vertical cut, probably, than to do it the other way. And maybe he didn't have the skill set or something, or he didn't want to listen to this young black girl who was at 17, having a baby. So anyway, so I remember him kind of agreeing with her. And, after just years in that relationship, I realized that, for one, I think that that it was a fetish. And, he was using me for clout within his black friend group. Like, look, and, that was cute at the time. I ain't gonna lie. I mean, I'm not much to look at the moment, because I've just let myself go. I'm not gonna lie, because I've been extraordinarily depressed and old. I'm just getting older, so there's that. But just extraordinarily depressed. If you don't go outside, I mean, I need my vitamin D, and I need to be doing things. But but I don't want to put him down or whatever. I mean, maybe he loved me. I don't know. But at the time, I think I was just, I think maybe on both sides, that we love the thought of the other person or what that person seemed to be. So for him, I always thought at the end I gave him kind of this street cred or this kind of, yeah, see, I'm not racist, or, look, although I would have to say that he treated me and my son, not all the time, but I would say after he was disengaged from the relationship, he treated us like garbage. I remember once my son had gotten a job at Safeway, like in his teenage years. And my son is a unique individual. So he just really always wanted to go to work early because he didn't want to be late. And he's the kind of person that would like to go and get his bearings. So he might go to work an hour early just so that he would make sure he wasn't late and that he could kind of sit, read his book and kind of get prepared to go to work and not have to worry about getting there. I think he always had anxiety about being late to things. So, and I remember once my ex was like, "Why are you going to work so early? We have things, you have responsibilities in this house that you have to do." And it just was so ridiculous. Like, it made no sense. Like, I don't know what he wanted him to do. Maybe he wanted to take out the garbage or something, but that it was, he blew up. Like, I mean, blew up. And then it was just silly. It was ridiculous. And he was often like that, like angry at us specifically all the time about minor things, which I think really had more to do with he just didn't want to be in the relationship anymore and he was just angry and bitter about it and treated us like garbage. I mean, there were so many times I could think of, but again, it's not to bash. I just, there were just times that I think that his white supremacy of us, that he felt justified in treating us like garbage. But then when we were around other people, he would be so nice, or he would come off like he was a good person. This whole nice thing, that I think that is one of the things that clear people, not all of them, but a lot of them tend to look how nice we are. And you see how pleasant, we're non-threatening, which is such a weird act to me. I swear. Like, and I used to think it. I used to, oh, they're so nice. Or even like if you guys remember in Cat Williams' thing, one of his stand-ups, he does this voice of, you got to get some white people in your life, get some white friends, because even if you call them at 3 a.m. in the morning, they'd be so nice. And he uses this really nice voice about, yeah, calling and it's the wrong number, and then they were like, hey, there's no problem if you can't figure it out, call us back. And I'm just like, that's, it's weird because I also know that Cat Williams knows that is, some of them are like that, but that's not necessarily how it actually is. And if it is like that, oftentimes I think it is to display, it's performative, right? It's to display, oh, look how great and nice we are. It's not like it's not a genuine sentiment. And I'm not saying all the time, obviously, because I think mean spirited, self centered types of people are everywhere. It just so happens that these people happen to have power over others and can make decisions, life threatening life decisions for other groups of people. So I don't know if it's unique to them, but they just have the power to be able to F people's lives up. So at the very end of it, I did feel like he was looking down on me, and because he was having an affair with a biracial woman or a light-skinned black woman, and he was just looking down on me and probably thought I was hideous, and it was really bad um at the end there. So I say all that to say, what do I really think about interracial relationships? I think that they are difficult, and unless the people go into them with the person each feeling equal, that it's really not going to work, because there's always going to be a hierarchy. And People say that they're not racist, but, and I don't care how many black friends you have, how many black people you are intimate with, that doesn't mean that you don't have racist sentiments. It just doesn't mean that. And on the other end, my upbringing, as I already mentioned, all of these messages from television, from my parents, from my foster parent, from, yeah, I just society is at large, it seemed like it was the better choice. And again, I never thought that. I never thought that um consciously. I never really thought that consciously. Other than when I was like, yeah, I wish I was adopted, when the whole different strokes scenario. I I never thought that in my dating life. I was just like, well, whoever likes me and whoever kind of comes along, and then these are the people that came along, and I wasn't one of those people that were like, nah, I'm not ever gonna date outside my race. Although all of my girlfriends were like, nah, I'm not gonna date outside my race. I mean, my black girlfriends, like all of their men were black. And then also in the 90s, I don't know that I was particularly desirable to black men, and that's a whole nother thing. And maybe I say that, but maybe that's not exactly true. Maybe that's what I was kind of led to believe. So, like I said, I was kind of cute. So, I don't know. I mean, but the thing is, I was already kind of wifed up all those years. So, from my teenage years to when I was 23, and my daughter's father, and I didn't cheat in that relationship. So, it was just him for that whole time. And that was like a 14-year marriage, we called it, but we weren't legally married. So, yeah, I don't know. I would say I have a lot of resentment. And after being targeted and knowing that at the absolute head of my targeting, there's a white person, because targeting is a very vast military operation. And knowing that a lot of targets are African Americans, and knowing a lot of targets are women, 70% I think of targets are female, that there's some kind of races and sexes elements to being targeted. And it's interesting because when I was younger, I had a lot of a different. One of my best friends was a white woman who we grew up in the foster care system together. And unfortunately, as time went on, like those relationships with white people, like those close ones, just kind of disintegrated. And I don't know if when we were younger, we just, how people say we didn't see color, we had a bond, we had a trauma bond, like a real trauma bond, meaning we both had gone through similar traumatic situations in our friendship, and that bonded us together. Because I don't know that we had a lot common outside of that. But I don't know. And maybe it was the changing of times. I think people, after Obama got elected, things just were different. I think there was a divide in those types of friendships. So I do see interracial relationships differently. And I also think about grandchildren. And maybe it's superficial of me to think about that like that. But I also think that those sentiments of black people not being good enough were passed on to my kids. And I also think because in that relationship there was a hierarchy, like he was supposed to be, my ex was supposed to be the stable one, the logical one, and I was seen as the misfit. Although I achieved, when I met him, I didn't even have my high school diploma, and by the time I left, I had a master's from Berkeley. So I wasn't like some person that was doing nothing. And then I raised two really, I think, kind, curious, intelligent college graduates. And that my kids are my greatest and most, I'm proudest of being their mom. And I was there. I don't know what these of what dossier that these people who are targeting me have, you know, um, until my children were adults, I was just a mom raising kids and doing stuff. So, taking them to art camp or I don't know, taking them to ice skating lessons after school, making them lunch and having dinner all together and having conversations and, taking them, we'd all go bike riding on the weekend or whatever parents do. Um, so I would say that I'm very proud of them, but I still think the message was communicated that somehow he was better than me and thus white people were better. And so my son has had no real relationships with black women, and my daughter, uh, her boyfriend is Japanese. So, and at this point, I'm like, whatever. You love who you love. How could I be a hypocrite and say, no, you can't? How dare you? This is ridiculous. But you don't think about it because if they do have grandchildren, which they do have children, then they will even be less black. And I know some people will be saying, that's so disgusting. Why do you even care about that? Well, I care. I think bleaching out or getting rid of all the black in your lineage is kind of a weird thing. And I don't want that. I'm sorry. That's not, when I went into this, I wasn't thinking about that, but I don't want that. And I know just saying it sounds it sounds weird or it sounds like, oh, that's racist. I don't know if it's racist or not, but I just know that, if you look at, what's that chick's name? Megan and Harry's kids, because Megan is half white and now her kids, those kids aren't black. I mean, some people might say, oh, well, they're a fourth, maybe, depending. I mean, genetics aren't like that exactly, because you could have two parents that are biracial and get together, and the kid could still be more white than black. But in this case, it's not. So, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I I don't have a very, all I can say is that I think that is something that I didn't really foresee and I didn't think about. And when I got into interracial relationship and that now I see it, I don't like it. I don't like that they prefer um, other races over the black race. And I just don't like it. And I'm not going to sit here and try and justify why I don't like it or whatever. I just don't. And that's right or wrong. I'm just being real. I'm just being like authentic in what my thought process is. And again, just because I've been talking over an hour now. Um, do I think it's wrong? No, but I think that when you're raising your kids, you got to make sure that they have exposure to both cultural backgrounds. And though my kids did have exposure to like my sister, but then when me and my sister fell out, then we hardly were ever, they never got to go and have our dinners for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Um, and my family didn't come around as much because my brother was out, lived in a different state. And I mean, I did take them to cultural events. I mean, we lived in Oakland, for goodness sake, but even, when my kids were little, I worked in a school district that once I worked in this it's so-called better schools, because we all, if you know anything about Oakland, you know that one of the things that is said is that the school districts aren't really good. Not, I don't know if I believe that exactly. There are good schools in every district, um, but I ended up working in Piedmont, which is an enclave in Oakland of very wealthy people. And so when I started working there, I had my kids moved into that district, and there weren't very many black people there. So again, and I didn't think these things out. I just didn't. I was just thinking I just want them to get a better education. That's all I really want. But then I basically was sending the message that these schools where there were predominantly black kids are not as good as these other schools that are predominantly white. And then even taking it further, when my daughter was in high school, I had stopped working in Piedmont because I had to go when I went to my master's program at Berkeley. I couldn't work anymore. You had to just, it wasn't one of those things where you could work. At least not, um, yeah, it was impossible to really work. So she ended up going to a private high school. I think it's the top, it's in the top 10 of private high schools in the country. But again, only majority white people. Although when she was in high school, though, she did have some really good African American friends, and I think that was because they were the only few kids there, and they really glommed onto each other. She had all kinds of friends, not unlike me when I was growing up, and not like her unlike her dad, because we both kind of had that. That was another thing that we connected on. That we had all types of friends growing up, but I don't know. I still think it's a message that if you wanted to have a better life, that you needed to go outside your race to do so. And looking back, I absolutely don't believe that. I just think it was unfortunate that I was with families that such had been impacted so much by racism, that they had such internalized racism. And I think that that's kind of what I grew up with, and those ideas were embedded. And I also think that these ideas of you love who you love, I think love is only one small aspect of being in a relationship, because the love that you feel in the beginning of your relationship doesn't last. It just doesn't. Maybe other people's love does. I don't know. Maybe I don't know anything because I'm single now and have been for quite some time. But I just think that it's not the same as the love that you have when you first begin your relationship. So therefore you can't base your relationship only on love, because the cultural aspects of it later on will come up, especially when you have children. And the person that is on the other side you see how when, this is just some random example because I mentioned them before, but when Meghan and Prince Harry got married, and then, this woman had lived her life pretty much as a white woman because she was white passing. I mean, sort of. I mean, I think black people knew she was black, but, she's pretty ambiguous looking. And But as soon as she had that baby or got pregnant, and then they start treating her like once she got around all those white people, her blackness came forth all of a sudden. And it's not dissimilar to my situation, because as much as I thought that, no, I fit in with everyone, no, not with those extra white people. You don't. No, you don't. You may think so. I mean, but anyway, what's the moral of the story here? I guess there's really no moral. I just think that, well, like I said, I think the moral is that you got to think about more than love when you get into a relationship. You got to think about things that people say they don't want to think about. Like, you do got to think about how will we raise our kids. I always thought my kids are black. I'm black. My kids are black. But as time went on, I realized that my kids actually get to define themselves, and whatever that is, I can't force anybody to say they're anything. But my son who looks black, I'm pretty sure he has to navigate his life as a black man. My daughter who, I mean, it's obvious she's mixed with something. And, depending on how she styles herself, she just may look kind of ambiguous as well. And so she doesn't have to necessarily pick a lane. And she gets to choose. At some point, I think by the time they were in middle school or whatever, I just look, I can't force people to say what they are. But I think on some level, by not making it not making it a really strong stance, I gave them permission or an out from embracing their black culture. Because basically, my daughter is gotten rid of all of it and embraced a different culture entirely, to the point she lives somewhere else and speaks a different language on a daily basis. She doesn't even speak English every day. So, I don't know. I hope if my friend listens to this, that he doesn't automatically think I'm some kind of sellout, because I'm not. I mean, yeah, and I'm not going to go into all of that, because you might say, well, why would you care about someone that you don't even really know on a social media app? I mean, you could say that, but that's whatever. I mean, it's mostly about, I just want to share stories so that people understand that, for one, everyone has a different life and they get to a different place based on their own particular journey. And I totally get now, because I do believe I was brainwashed as a child. And I do think that it's important for people to make decisions, like life-changing decisions, as getting married, who they get married with, and having children, and how they're going to raise them, and the messages that they're going to communicate to them about who they are. And then at what point do you just let them decide and let them be themselves? And I don't want to be a hypocrite. I can't tell people not to have interracial relationships when both of my major relationships have been. I just think it's not as simple, and especially when you're black. And you need to, someone I feel is always giving something up. And oftentimes it's the black person. One of the races or ethnicities, because race and ethnicity are different, but I'm just saying, dominate. And I know in my son's case, I don't think that the Nicaraguan background factors much into his life. I mean, I know he's proud of it and he doesn't deny it, but his father was absent, and so he just wasn't, he didn't have strong enough connection to that. So, and that's too bad, but anyway, so that's my ramblings. What do people think? I would be interested in what people think about that. If you even listen to this, because it's extremely long and probably boring, and probably no one's going to listen to it. No, I shouldn't say that. All right. Feel free to comment, good or bad. I can take it.